It's time for Security Now. Yes, I am back. Thank you to Father Robert Ballas for filling in for me. We have a lot to talk about, including initiatives by the UK, by France, and by Japan to infringe on our privacy even more than before. Steve explains next on Security Now.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Security Now is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com. This is Security Now with Steve Gibson, episode 617, recorded Tuesday, June 20th, 2017, when governments react. Security Now is brought to you by Drobo, a family of safe, expandable, yet easy-to-use storage arrays. Drobos are designed to protect your important data forever. Visit drobostore.com to learn more. And don't forget to use the offer code TWIT10 to save 10% off selected Drobos, including the brand new Drobo 5N2. And by Sonic, literally by Sonic, Twit's 10 gigabit fiber internet service provider. We love you, Sonic. Join Sonic's internet revolution as they bring fast, affordable internet, phone, and TV to homes and businesses all over California. Visit sonic.com/twit to sign up for service and receive your first month free. And by Carbonite. Keep your business safe this year. Protect your business from ransomware and hacker attacks with automatic cloud backup from Carbonite. Try it free at Carbonite.com. Don't forget to use the offer code SecurityNow to get 2 free bonus months if you decide to buy. It's time for Security Now, the show where we cover your latest security woes. Always something to talk about with Steve Gibson of GRC. Good to see you, Steve.
Great to have you back, Leo. All rested and relaxed and raring to go.
I thank Father Robert for filling in. It's nice. Now, he's on vacation. I understand he's not allowed to talk on his vacation.
No, in fact, I sent him a note to follow up on like hours after we finished recording last week, just to say thanks for standing in. And I got an auto reply saying I'm like no longer receiving email. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and
how long is that going to be, Lisa? If the he's on his.
He said 2 months.
His tertian. They call it his tertianship.
I think it's
2 months. Wow.
2 straight months. But excited on this. Guess who's going to sign it from the U.S.?
Who's going to sign it?
A 1 or 2 star general.
A 2-star general is going to sign this. Maybe this just in, Steve. We got an email from the National Security Agency, and this is not a joke.
No, I blocked out the guy's name.
Yeah, it's been redacted, see? The NSA would like to import your Security Now show onto its intranet for general dissemination to our cybersecurity workforce. Have you're not surprised? So you've obviously received the same email, Steve, or
no? But I have a standing invitation from them to come.
They
and
like
talk,
you
so.
over there at the.
Yeah.
They say, while we believe under the Creative Commons license this is permissible, which it is, there are elements within your website's term of use we cannot agree to. And therefore precludes us from importing those shows. Specifically, parts of the disputes and indemnity section are inconsistent with federal law. I think we just pasted them from some website, so I'm not surprised. We would like to execute a memorandum of understanding between the NSA and TWIT to modify these sections in a manner consistent with federal law. And apparently, then we said, well, okay, but who's going to sign it? And they said, well, it'll be either a 2 or a 3-star general.
1 or 2 star.
1 or 2 star. There'll be stars involved. So is that okay with you, Steve? We give Security Now to the NSA?
Absolutely fine. I was hoping that maybe Donald would sign the order.
It would be fun if could you get the president to sign it?
You guys are asking a lot.
Okay. Just ask him, you know. General Clapper will be signing it. I don't know who will be signing it.
Tell Lisa thank you and hi.
Yes, and Steve says hi. Okay. No, I saw that this morning. I thought, that is great. Steve will love that.
I do. That's great.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It never fails to impress me, the number of people who listen to this show and then the variety of places that they listen. I think this is, at this point, become the premier show for security information. And so everybody wants to know what's going on, and no one tells the story better than Steve.
Well, you know, I learned the lesson back when I was doing the Tech Talk column for InfoWorld that endurance is one of the defining factors. After a couple years, I got a nice note from the then editor-in-chief of InfoWorld, Jonathan Sachs, who said he was responding to one particular column I had written about how optical magneto drives functioned, and the lesson I learned when as a child I dropped a powerful magnet and it lost its magnetism. Anyway, so I put it all together in a column, and he said, wow, I I love what you're doing. And I said to him at the time, I responded, and I said, well, gee, thanks. I kind of feel like sometimes my voice is going off into the wilderness and nothing is happening. And he said, Steve, you have to understand, it takes time for people to get to know you. He said they're, and he was referring, of course, to the print version of InfoWorld, which is pretty much all we had at the time. He said, they're taking you into the bathroom with them, which is why I wanted to clarify that, and into bed at the end of the day. And they have to form a personal relationship with a columnist, and I think that it's very much the same with a podcast. And so, here we are approaching the end of year 12, and endurance, as I said.
Yeah, it's true in radio too. That the longer you last on a show, people become like an old shoe. And I'm the king of old shoes.
Oh, I've got so many old shoes. They're much better than the new shoes.
Very soft and accommodating.
So this is episode 617, and as I said to you, last week's title was "Things Are Getting Worse," and looking over the news from this week, I thought, okay, I have to title this one "When Governments React." So we're going to discuss this week France's, Britain's, Japan's, Germany's, and Russia's, the way I put it in my little summary, each veering around in their crypto crash cars because they're, reacting to the crypto problem on the internet. We'll also talk about WikiLeaks Vault7, reveal of a widespread CIA Wi-Fi router penetration, and oh my lord, the number of vulnerable Wi-Fi routers and access points is what's sort of stunning about this. It's not like one or two. Also, we got some information, thanks to some fresh reporting about exactly why it is that we can no longer travel with our laptops. Some more details about the HP printer security insanity that we originally covered in April. Now we know what the nature of the problem, and it's been exploited in the lab and explained to us. So we're going to cover that. A fun chart that was made from, I think it was 32 million passwords, analyzing for example, in one case, what is the distribution of password length, which is sort of fascinating. Microsoft has finally said, in the wake of the WannaCry, that they're going to kill off version 1 of their SMB, the file and printer sharing protocol, which is what enabled WannaCry to propagate.
Good.
Yes, although, of course, now we've got patches. We also have the all-time mega ransomware payout, which is somewhat stunning. Google has announced that they're going to get into it's not quite whole system backup business, but it's closer. So it won't be competing with one of our sponsors. In fact, a sponsor of this particular today's podcast, Carbonite, but it's kind of related. We'll talk about that. And believe it or not, it's possible to hack a PC with, of all things, a vape pen. We'll also cover a little bit of miscellany and some closing the loop feedback with our terrific listeners. So I think another great podcast.
Let me ask you, still using your Drobo?
I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah. I was asking myself last night, where's my Drobo? And then I realized, oh yeah, that's my main drive for my iMac. I love my Drobo. Drobo brings you the show and has the new Drobo 5 and 2, which I think a lot of listeners here will be interested in. Drobo was started when its founder, suffered a hard drive crash, and he said, "But wait, I've got a RAID array. You can't crash." But it turned out that his software RAID array, was there, but not doing its job. And he said, I'm going to invent something that they call Beyond RAID, a better redundant storage solution. Drobos are designed to keep your data, important data, safe forever. And not just Beyond RAID, but they have all sorts of great features like battery backed up cache, which means, I love that. It means that even if the power just goes out, it's mirroring existing data. So, you don't get write failure or data corruption if the power goes out. I love that. Drobo has the easiest to use system ever. See the front of the Drobo there with the lights? Those lights tell you everything you need to know. If you've got room left, if you need to swap drives, and by the way, it's easy to swap them without any tools. You'll know exactly what's going on your Drobo. I'm a big fan. I have a Drobo as my main hard drive attached to my iMac. Drobo network solution as well, the 5N. And now here's the 5N2. High performance. They've upgraded the processor. They've got port bonding now, so you can have 2 gigabit Ethernet ports and bond them together for high-speed connections. SSD compatibility. That's what I use with my Drobo Mini. I have 4 solid-state drives in there. This thing is lightning quick. Plus, on all the Drobos, you can add that little MSATA accelerator card to the bottom. They all have that bay, which really speeds up small file writes and so forth. That's on the 5N2 as well. Secure backup, remote data access, disaster recovery, and then a massive app store. Drobo Pix for photo backup, Plex for media streaming, cloud apps for data syncing, for backup, developer tools for programs and websites. There's a full LAMP stack on the 5N2. Node.js, so you can run WordPress on your Drobo. You can run any Node application. You can also use C, Go, Perl, Python, Ruby. There's even a Git client on here. This is, in this modern age, where we're starting to be a little worried about cloud providers. This is the way to make your own cloud, the Drobo 5N2. Find out more at drobostore.com. And if you use the offer code Drobo at drobostore.com, the offer code TWIT10, 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 10% off the purchase on select Drobo models. Drobostore.com, and don't forget, the offer code TWIT10 for 10% off select models. And we thank Drobo for their support and for making such nice hardware for me and Steve.
Yeah, my system sends an image of the system to the Drobo in the middle of the night every day.
Oh, that's a great way to back up.
And so it has
whole thing there.
So I have a rolling previous 7 days images of the system, just to, so that if anything happens, I have that. And it does not use a statically mounted share. It uses it dynamically, so that, God forbid, crypto malware got in, it wouldn't see the Drobo mapped to my system.
Perfect.
So it wouldn't be able to go.
What's the capacity in your Drobo? How many drives?
I filled it with 1 terabyte drive.
Little baby drives, little tiny weeny
well,
drives.
you know me. My whole system is like 32 gig, I think. So
you don't really need it.
I got plenty of room.
You can have 7 days as images. I think I put 2, 3 drives are so big now. I think I put 2 3s and 2 2s. So that's 4 plus 6 is 10. And then they take a third of it for the redundancy. So it's about 6 or 7 terabytes. That's enough. I ain't going to run out anytime soon.
We're so glib with our terabytes.
I know.
These days.
This 5N will go up to 30 terabytes now. That's 5 by 6. 6 terabyte drives. Unbelievable.
So our picture of the week is brought to us by the ever clever XKCD. And reading the caption is the way to explain this best over the air. I titled it Lunch Order, and the caption reads, "Everyone complains about autocorrect, but we forget about the time it prevented a nuclear war." And so we have some guy who's approaching the control console who says, "Sir, Strategic Command has sent us a lunch order," and the supervisor says, "Don't they have anything better to do?"
Not lunch. Lunch
Exactly.
Lunch.
That's wonderful.
Pretty funny.
Okay, so in our coverage of how governments are reacting, the first is a combined French-British action plan, as it's titled. Got the PDF to it. It's just 2 pages, but I'll just pull the highlights from it. The link to the PDF is in the show notes. So it says, terrorists and the people they influence are using the internet, websites, email services, and social networks to gather information, organize, spread propaganda, and operating methods, send and receive instructions, and claim responsibility for their acts. At a meeting in Paris on the 13th of June, that is just a week and a half ago, Prime Minister May and President Macron agreed to a joint UK-France initiative to ensure the internet cannot be used as a safe place for terrorists and criminals. They stressed that coordination with G7 and EU partners will be sought on these issues. The following 4 points were agreed as priorities. And I'm not going to go into them in detail, but the first one was improve methods to remove illegal content from the internet. And so, you know, the idea of like coming up with ways to prevent unwanted
bomb making stuff, or
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, you know, so for example, they said while efforts have been observed from companies regarding removing terrorist content, we need industry to move from their current position of reactively removing content when it is notified to them to proactively identifying content and preventing it from being made available on their platforms in the first place. So, you know, this is getting kind of dicey because, as we'll see, you know, essentially governments are, as we've been predicting, wanting to exert explicit control over what has historically been a communications commons, a global commons where people had anonymity and the freedom to put up what they ever wanted to, and and the presumption was people would use their best judgment in how to decide about the veracity of the information presented. The second point was,
by the way, do you remember? You're old enough. We are old enough.
Yeah,
to remember the Anarchist's Cookbook, right? Remember in the 60s, everybody wanted to take that out of every library. It's pre-internet, obviously, because it had bomb-making recipes in it, and free speech won out. Yes. And you've always been able to get the Anarchist's Cookbook, and of course now you can get it on the internet. So this is nothing new. Governments have been trying to do this forever.
Right. I guess maybe what's different is, we're more
scared.
Well, we've talked about how law enforcement is complaining on one hand that they don't have the access that they want to the communications, but on the other hand, they've never had more access in the history of man to online activities. So, I think it's natural for law enforcement to want everything that they can get, and it's probably also useful for there to be a compromise, for there to be some pushback, so that it's just not like I guess what I'm trying to say is
this first part is they want to censor the internet. They don't want stuff to be on the internet because you could use it. Partly because it'd be maybe bomb-making information, but partly because it'd be terrorist propaganda designed to encourage the weak-minded to become terrorists.
Right. Well, in fact,
that's government censorship. And in fact, it's what do they call that? Before the fact.
Oh wait, just let me think. It was well, we're coming to it. There's actually, it's been called pre-crime.
Yeah.
And that's.
We'll get to it. I don't want to. I'm sorry.
We'll be getting to it in a second.
I'll shut up.
It's Japan. Anyway, that's next. So the second point you were just alluding to, quote, support the efforts of civil society organizations to promote alternative and counter narratives. So they're saying,
I don't have a problem with that.
Right. Pull down the bad stuff, put up the good stuff. But then number 3 is what, has been lurking around, and I think it's inevitable. Work together to ensure our countries can access data for investigative purposes.
Yeah, this is the snoopers stuff.
Yes. And so we have 3.1 under that. Seek to preserve the retention and access to traffic and location data under current terrorist threat levels. The ability to retain data useful to investigations remains essential. Second point, enable subscription holders to be identified in all circumstances.
Boy.
So now we're talking about loss of anonymity.
Yep.
They said a single internet protocol address can be shared between hundreds of users accessing the internet or social platforms via their smartphones. The capability to identify specific users is important, particularly where suspects have accessed terrorist content. So then they said under their proposals, share expertise and legislative experience regarding these issues, including with Europol, with a view to intensifying dialogue with the industry. So the idea being, they're saying now IP address is no longer sufficiently granular because, of course, everyone behind a NAT or behind a Tor proxy or any other, major proxy or a VPN has their traffic mixed together. So they're beginning to say, we want some way to penetrate identity beyond IP. And then, of course, the inevitable point 3 allow access to encrypted content. And they said when encryption technologies are used by criminal groups and terrorists, it must be possible to access the content of communications and their metadata. This is not about, they say, backdoors or banning encryption, but ensuring governments and companies develop shared solutions to this issue. Of course, without suggesting how we achieve that miracle. And so they said under their proposals, share strategies on the challenge of accessing content from encrypted services and coordinate our engagement with the major communication service providers. So here again, we're seeing, this move towards the ability to move, at least in the U.S., we have a constitution which protects us against search or unwarranted search and seizure. So you get a warrant in order to do that. I'll be very surprised if that isn't what happens with the U.S. And then this is a challenge globally because we're all sharing a single big network at this point. Anyway, the second country or the third country, that was France and Britain getting together. Last week, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's government passed a controversial piece of legislation giving prosecutors, get this, the power to monitor and arrest people in the planning stages of crimes. So this is what some coverage of this has called pre-crime. After an all-night legislative session in Tokyo, lawmakers who were deliberately delayed by the bill's opposition finally voted to pass the so-called anti-conspiracy bill, controversial legislation that gives prosecutors the power to monitor and arrest people in the planning stages of crimes. The government claims this is needed to bolster counterterrorism precautions ahead of the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. Under the bill, terrorist groups or criminal organizations could be punished for the planning of, and I thought it was amazing that there was a number put on this, 277 different crimes. Apparently they're enumerated, ranging from arson to copyright violation.
Uh-oh.
Critics of the legislation argue that the legislation is vague and could lead to the suppression of civil liberties and excessive state surveillance. It's also seen by many as a preamble to Abe's ambition to revise Japan's constitution. Commenting about this, a professor of political science at the Sophia University in Tokyo was quoted saying, "This fits Abe's agenda in the run-up to a prospective national referendum on constitutional revision and Japan's possible involvement in future wars. Both of these would require new means to control unruly citizens who object to government decisions." So, yeah. And not surprisingly, Russia is moving forward. We discussed, I think it was last year, when Russia changed some laws to ban some classes of VPNs. And you'll remember, Leo, that one VPN provider in particular, Private Internet Access, pulled their service from the country after they were raided and had some of their servers seized. So now there's a new surveillance bill promising in the Russian parliament, promising to deliver greater security, unquote, to the country. But as with so many countries, the bill's effect looks like it's going to do the opposite, mandating new encryption backdoors and imposing new data retention requirements on ISP and VPN providers. So this legislation is expected to take effect in 2018, next year, and the new law, this is a little chilling, would require messenger users, that is, users of messaging app, to verify their real-world identities using their phone numbers with Russian mobile phone operators.
God.
So you will be under the explicitly de-anonymized, so you can no longer use anonymous messaging. Your messaging identity has to be tied to your real world identity. So, something that we've been taking for granted about the internet, and that I'm no doubt a lot of Russian citizens appreciate, will become unlawful next year. And there's also some additional impositions imposed on VPN providers. In Russia, broadband users, as we've been covering, have increasingly turned to VPNs to avoid the growing list of censored websites. To help thwart such usage, the bill would not only impose steep fines on VPN providers who don't agree to block blacklisted websites, but would require ISPs to terminate this of those VPN providers who do not comply. The legislation reads, quote, "As it stands, the bill requires local telecoms watchdog Roskomnadzor to keep a list of banned domains while identifying sites, services, and software that provides access to them. Once the bypassing services are identified, Roskomnadzor will send notice to their hosts, giving them a 72-hour deadline to reveal the identities of their operators. After this stage is complete, the host will be given another 3 days to order the people running the circumvention-capable service providing access to banned domains. If the service operator fails to comply within 30 days, all internet service providers will be required to deny access to the service and its web presence if it has one." So, within Russian borders, basically they're legislating out of existence some of the fundamental operating flexibility and freedom that the internet has provided. And lastly, Germany. A follower of ours, Ian Beckett, often sends me photos of pages because it's just easy for him to do. and this one is a piece, an article from the London Times, headlined "Germany to Change Law on Encryption." And the article reads, "Laws to enable security services to see messages before they're encrypted by providers such as WhatsApp are being drawn up in Germany because of concerns over secret communications between Islamist terrorists. Angela Merkel's government believes that the same balance of eavesdropping and privacy should exist in the digital age as in the analog era of letters and phone calls. Ms. Merkel aims to put digital security on the agenda for the G20 summit that she's hosting in Hamburg next month. Theresa May has, as we know, has also called for a global approach to regulating digital providers, saying during the election campaign that there should be no, quote, safe space for terrorist ideologues. Germany is known as one of the countries most protective of personal privacy because of the legacy of surveillance by the Nazi regime and the Stasi secret police of communist East Germany. However, terrorism in Europe is fueling calls for change. British authorities were incensed that they could not access the last WhatsApp message sent by Khalid Massoud, the Westminster attacker, minutes before he began his killing spree by driving into pedestrians and fatally stabbing a policeman. The messaging company owned by Facebook said that its service, meaning WhatsApp, of course, that its service was so secure that no one but the sender and recipient could see a message, not even WhatsApp itself. Quote, "We want messenger services to have an end-to-end encryption so that the communication of respectable citizens is undisturbed and secure," said the German Interior Minister. But, quote, "Nevertheless, security authorities need the option of access under certain circumstances. That would allow the authorities to read a suspect's communications before it was encrypted," he said. So standing back from all this, we should remember that it's, as we know, it's in the commercial interests of Facebook, WhatsApp, Apple, and so on to claim that they are unable to read messages because their customers state that they want security. I would argue that evidence suggests that people want it, but they're not that concerned about it. It's like, yeah, if I can have it, that's fine. But if you give me an ice cream cone, I'll tell you my password. So no biggie. But remember that the actual trade-off for the convenience of users not being burdened with explicit key management and endpoint verification, for example, as Threema requires its users to do, is that any of these providers can, in fact, tap into their services communications. So I'm not saying they can do this retrospectively at the moment, though that capability could be added. But we do know that they could do it prospectively as with a wiretap order under a warrant. So anyway, I think that the future is uncertain, but as our listeners know, this is one of the reasons that I stopped work years ago on my own VPN solution, because from our own coverage of what we saw happening, it looked like the handwriting was on the wall and that it was going to be impossible to have truly secure communications that were unbreakable, which is unfortunate. WikiLeaks.
I'm going to play a little devil's advocate.
Good.
Is there not a way to balance privacy with security a little bit? So, for instance, there's nothing I'm sending in my emails that really need to be private.
Yep.
And if it helped prevent another Westminster Bridge attack, to have those rules, wouldn't that be kind of? I mean, there's conflicting needs, obviously.
Correct, and I agree with you completely, Leo. I use iMessage because I'm sending tweets to my friends about what's going on, or iMessages to my friends. I understand the position of people who are strongly opposed to any kind of opportunity for surveillance.
Right.
I want to respect that, but the fact is, no one using WhatsApp or iMessage or Facebook Messenger, no one using those tools actually has that. So
You're saying that because the companies that make those programs actually could, if they wanted to, access the communications.
They are controlling the cryptography and the keys, and iMessage is a multi-way messaging system. So if someone said to Apple, we must have this communications, then an additional key could be added, and the user would have, it's completely non-transparent. So,
however, Signal and Threema and a variety of other apps don't have that flaw and are in fact secure.
Correct.
And presumably bad guys know that.
Well, yes, and notice that.
Although, wait a minute, he used WhatsApp, so maybe he didn't know that.
Well, precisely, and I would argue that somebody who really cares isn't going to be using one of these
text message,
easy, mass used.
Right.
Although there was the interesting wording here about capturing before encryption, so that suggests that the legislators have been having hearings and are listening to people saying once it's encrypted it can't be decrypted, and they're saying, well, how about then before it gets encrypted? Yeah. And and we all know, as you're typing it in and you're seeing it on the screen before you hit send, it's sitting there in the clear. So and this is why we've said on this podcast, the only way to actually have true security is for two naked people to meet in the middle of Central Park, under an umbrella, or throw a opaque bag over their head so no one can read their lips, and then whisper to each other. I mean, if you're using technology, it provides lots of benefits, but actual security is an illusion. And absolute security is an illusion.
And then, on the other hand, you could say, well, the terrorists win because we have decided to abridge our own liberties to protect ourselves. And really, as bad as this is, the risks of death or injury from terrorist attack are very, very, very small.
Well, and Leo, I would also argue that governments want the ability to eavesdrop.
For other reasons. Well, you see when they mention copyright, right?
Right.
But they're not just protecting us against people who would harm us. They're
and how many people how many times have they marched out the child abuse and child pornography?
Right.
So the point is, some of these things are a means to the end that the government wants.
That's something you want to watch. They're using fear to further their own agenda that has nothing to do with terrorism.
Although, in the U.S., we have a constitution that says if a judge decides that there is probable cause for someone's phone to be tapped, historically, the law enforcement is able to do that. And I argue, I don't think that should change. I mean, to me, that seems like it's a trade-off that has worked, and the challenge is that doing it without introducing extra vulnerability is tricky. That is, that's why, for example, selectively adding a key to a dialogue under warrant seems like the right trade-off, where then an additional encrypted stream is and only the matching key can decrypt it, that seems controllable. But if a system is in place where it's possible, for example, to put a tap in before the encryption, then you really, that is a backdoor. You really are then opening it up to abuse, and it's difficult for me to see from a technology standpoint how you make that, how you keep the bad guys from being able to pry that open too. And so, again,
that's another issue. Absolutely, yeah.
Let's just move forward slowly on this, and hopefully not have some bad legislation occur.
It's also possible to get paranoid, over paranoid of this stuff. For instance, I was really worried about taking a laptop and phones outside the United States for fear of what would happen as I crossed the border. And of course, nothing happened. It was the easiest thing. It took me 15 seconds to get back into the U.S. with my U.S. passport. So, yeah, you can get over worried about this kind of thing as well.
Well, in fact, I know that the U.S. saw a dramatic drop in foreign tourism during the whole
tourism, not tourism.
Tourism.
I don't want to confuse the two.
A drop in tourism during the early days of the new Trump administration with the travel ban.
Right, like 17% or something. Yeah.
Yes, not that people couldn't come in. They just didn't know.
Yeah. And
so they didn't want to get on a plane if they were going to be sent home after reaching the other end of their flight. Exactly as you say, just the uncertainty is creates a chilling effect.
And if I were a brown Muslim, I might have gotten a lot more hassle coming in to the country. U.S. citizen.
Sad as that is.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So WikiLeaks dropped another blob of Vault7 leaked documents from the CIA. And we learned last week of a project called Cherry Blossom. And it's a little chilling. This is a rather comprehensive Wi-Fi router and access point hacking system in place and used by the CIA. And I would argue that perhaps the most breathtaking aspect is the breadth of exploitation possible. I have a link to the PDF of the affected devices in the show notes. And although in the document they're in alphabetical order, I first snapped this that wasn't, but it looks like maybe they're in most popular order. Belkin, D-Link, Linksys, Aeronet/Cisco, the Apple Airport Express, Allied Telesin, Ambit, Amit, Inc., Acton, 3Com, Austech, BreezeCom, Cameo, Epigram, Gemtech, Global Sun, SingTech, Orinico, Planet Technology, RPT, Int, Sanao, US Robotics, and ZCom, and many models of all of those routers. And as we know, many of these routers share common firmware across their model line, where they just have different numbers of ports and antennas and speeds and things, but the core firmware is the same. And so, I mean, I didn't count the line items, but like, I don't want to say all models of all of these routers, but anyone interested should go look. With this latest batch of leaked Vault7 documents are the details of what is basically Wi-Fi device firmware hacking framework, which is being used by the CIA for monitoring internet activity of targeted systems by exploiting vulnerabilities in these Wi-Fi devices. So this was reportedly designed in a joint effort by the CIA with the help of SRI International, of all people. I was surprised by that. That's Stanford Research Institute, which is a U.S. nonprofit research institute. I think they're located in Palo Alto, as part of its Cherry Bomb project. So Cherry Blossom is a remotely controllable firmware-based implant for both wireless routers and access points, which exploits router vulnerabilities to gain unauthorized access and then replace the firmware with custom cherry blossom firmware. So the wireless devices are implanted with this custom cherry blossom firmware. And since many devices support over-the-network updates, physical access is not required. Once implanted with this firmware, these devices then perform, not surprisingly, man-in-the-middle attacks to monitor and manipulate the internet traffic of their connected users. So in the documentation, which is extensive here, there's even an installation guide where it states that the Cherry Tree command and control server must be located in a secure, sponsored facility and installed on Dell PowerEdge 1850 powered virtual servers running Red Hat Fedora 9 with at least 4 gig of RAM. So the whole toolkit is laid out. And these compromised routers and access points naturally are able to monitor network traffic, to collect email addresses, chat usernames, MAC addresses, and VoIP numbers. They're able to redirect connected users to malicious websites or non-authentic websites, I guess I would phrase it, to inject custom content into the data stream, to fraudulently deliver, in the bullet points here, it says malware and compromise the connected systems. I would argue maybe, it's mal depending upon your perspective. Setting up VPN tunnels to access clients connected to Flytrap's WLAN and LAN for further exploitation. Flytrap being another one of the monikers in this system, and also the ability to copy the full network traffic of a targeted device, essentially exfiltrate to some remote server for later analysis. So, again, what we're seeing here, sort of in all of this post-Snowden era, is that unfortunately our law enforcement agencies have lost control of apparently much of their secret tool set, or at least lost control of the documentation, and that in fact, as I said earlier, the fact that there are Wi-Fi access points and routers, which used to be a rarity. I mean, it was like, well, do you have Wi-Fi? Now you don't even ask the question. You open up Wi-Fi on your phone and you have to scroll through a list of access points that are within range. So again, it's not like there's a lack of capability and a lack of a rich target rich environment for law enforcement to access, and I don't think that's going to change. So it's difficult to see anyone complaining that they don't have the access that they want. And speaking of what they want, I'm going to take a sip of coffee, Leo.
You want coffee? Good, because I got something everybody wants, but not everybody can get. Our sponsor, Sonic.com, they literally bring you this show each and every week and all our shows because we are on a 10 gigabit symmetric fiber connection to the internet.
Rub it in.
Yeah, baby. Yeah. Thank you, Sonic. Thank you. But you can get Sonic at home in many cases, maybe not in many cases. In a few cases, if you're in San Francisco, the North Bay area, or the East Bay area, and listening to this show, there's no reason you shouldn't have Sonic. It's the best internet service provider. When we're talking about the list of things governments want to do to shut you down, you will be happy to know Sonic stands up for its customers. They believe in privacy. They believe in no bandwidth caps, no limits, and affordable pricing for everything. Plus, of course, friendly local customer support. Sonic's customer advocacy is paving the way for a better state of the internet across the United States. And even though you probably can't get it where you are, you should be grateful that Sonic is doing what they do to change internet access in this area. And as they grow much more of the United States, too many people pay too much for unsatisfactory cable internet. Sonic delivers fast, affordable internet and phone, by the way, and TV to businesses and homes all over California. What do you get? You won't believe it. When you subscribe to Sonic, not only do you get a gigabit download speeds, up to 1,000 megabits a second, you get with, and wait till you hear the price for this, with that, 15 email accounts, a gigabyte of storage, personal web hosting with a new domain. You get fax line service. You also get home phone service with unlimited local and long-distance calling. Easy, by the way, to port your number over, because this is like a phone service, so you can bring your number from your existing phone provider. And all of that, gigabit, 15 email accounts, gig of storage, website, home phone, unlimited long-distance and local, $40 a month. I don't know how the cable companies stay in business. I really don't. This is such a great deal. And if you want TV, bundle with Dish, you'll save $120 on your Sonic bill. Find out more. Visit sonic.com/twit. And when you sign up there, you'll receive your first month of Sonic internet and phone service free. And if you can't get it, well, beg, ask, say, well, I want Sonic. And tell your internet service provider there is a better way. Sonic.com/twit. We're so glad that they are with us in this. What was one of the things when we looked in this building, there was a little business card that said Sonic. I said, yes. We're moving here. That was a big consideration, right? Of course it is. By the way, Steve, as long as we're talking about internet access, you are breaking up periodically. Not so badly that I'd want to start over, but every once in a while I get a little blip, a little hit on you. It could be us, could be you. Don't know. Don't know.
And how did that compare to what happened with Renee after about an hour?
It's very similar.
Okay.
And I guess Floss Weekly was having problems this morning, so it may well be us.
Well, and remember too that Microsoft has redefined the way Skype connects.
Yeah.
We used to be able to get a direct point-to-point connection.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
And they shut that down. We're now routed through Skype servers.
Huh?
And
Floss was Randall. Okay. So yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it could be that. But the weird thing is, there are some hosts we never have problems with. So I just don't know what it is. I really don't. We've tried all sorts of things, but anyway, just a note.
Yep.
Nothing to do about it.
Okay, so I had this in my show notes, why we can't have nice things. And I said, or take our nice things traveling with us. We finally got some interesting details about those increasing restrictions which had been imposed on traveling with electronics.
Yeah.
Essentially, what we've learned was that Israeli hackers reportedly got into ISIS networks and found they were building laptop bombs. Two reporters, David Sanger and Eric Schmidt, reported that top Israeli cyber operators penetrated a small cell of extremist bomb makers in Syria several months ago. And that was how the U.S. learned that the terrorists were working to make explosives that could pass port X-ray machines and other screening by looking exactly like batteries for laptop computers. And according to two American officials that the reporters used as anonymous sources who were familiar with the operation, the intelligence obtained was so complete that it enabled the United States to understand how the weapons could be detonated.
Wow.
The information helped prompt a ban in March on large electronic devices in carry-on luggage on flights from 10 airports in 8 Muslim-majority countries to the United States and Britain. And, of course, it was also, unfortunately, part of the classified intelligence that the U.S. President Donald Trump is believed to have revealed to the two Russian officials, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and the ambassador to the U.S., Sergei Kislyak. It was the disclosure of that classified intelligence that reportedly greatly upset Israeli officials, because it revealed the fact that the security, this very small cell of extremist Syrian bomb makers, had been compromised, thus putting the future intelligence gathering at some unnecessary risk. So in any event, we now know a bit more about what's going on. And of course, as an engineer who travels with electronics, I've always been a little bemused, because like for years, the TSA agents would say, turn that on. And it was like, what? Really? As if them, just, and the second the screen lit up, they would say, okay, that's enough. And it's like, so as an engineer, the whole issue that laptops are a risk if they won't power up, but they're not if they will. I mean, it just never made any sense to me, because you'd need to be extremely incompetent and way less technical than anyone you could find to believe that such a weak verification would make any sense. I just don't get that. And in another little weird anecdote, I last week ordered a high capacity capacitor. It was a multi-farad supercapacitor, and I didn't note that it had lithium as an ingredient. I ordered it online from my favorite supplier, and I got a phone call from them saying, hey, you asked for this to be sent to you via priority mail, but this has lithium in it. And I said, it's not a battery. It's not going to explode. And she said, well, I'm sorry, but it's got lithium, and you can't send anything with lithium through the mail. And I said, okay. So anyway, it's coming to me via, I don't know, FedEx or UPS. Either of those two carriers are able to take it. So again, this is, because it's got the L word in it, even though it doesn't have lithium ion chemistry, it still spooks people. And so we're being put through unnecessary inconvenience as a result. Although I'm not saying that, lithium batteries don't explode. They do, but lithium capacitors do not. Okay, so earlier this year, it was in April, actually, a couple months ago, we talked about the serious problem with printers that, in this case, it was HP printers that are, widely distributed around the globe and had some unknown vulnerabilities that HP was fixing in a firmware update. There was no information, no additional background about that. But after HP's detail-lacking April security bulletin, some guys at the security firm Tenable decided to take a closer look under the hood of HP printers. So they purchased a pair of HP OfficeJet Pro 8210s. And they bought two so that they could leave one without updated firmware and then update the firmware of the other one and then do some comparison. Well, it turns out that, get this, in the printers, auto updating of the firmware was disabled by default. So immediately that suggests that most users of HP's printers that have been known vulnerable since April, and now we have a complete disclosure in this as a result of this research, will not automatically receive fixes for the problems that have been found. We'll have a takeaway for the listeners of this podcast in a moment, but I took a screenshot from Tenable's reporting showing that the firmware in one of these printers was dated April 28th of 2016, so a year old, and also showing down at the bottom, do not check for updates is the default setting. So that means that globally, is assuming that this is the default setting for HP printers, at least of this firmware family, which we could assume these machines will never be updated unless users are proactive, which is what I hope our listeners will be. So the Tenable guys manually updated one of the two identical printers' firmware in order to have, as I mentioned, both before and after patched images. But it turned out they didn't need that. They first used Nmap to scan the printer for open ports and found a unsurprising set of ports, 80, 443, 8080, and 9100. 9100, the so-called Jet Direct port, which turns out to be hosting many problems, and it is present on all HP printers. It's sort of the default means for the printer, the HP printer driver, to talk to a networked printer. So by using a PC-based instance of the very powerful Netcat utility, they experimented connecting to port 9100 and sending a bunch of different commands in. And one of the things they played with was the old school path traversal exploits, where you prepend a directory list command, for example, with // // The idea being that if a server isn't protected against that, you're able to walk back to the root or upstream of the directory which is your normal logged in directory for that service, essentially in order to escape from what weak containment that server provided. So by doing this, they were able to explore within, and this is all over the network. They didn't have to open anything up or pry any chips loose or anything. This is just talking to port 9100. They found the Linux/bin directory, demonstrating that it's possible to traverse into that printer's Linux directory. Okay, then using 3 PJL commands. This port 9100 supports several different protocols. One of them is called the printer job language, and there's an fs query, fs upload, and fs download command, which provides them with read-write access to the printer's file systems. So then they demonstrated that using 2 of those, fs query and fs upload, combined with the directory traversal, they're able to retrieve the contents of, for example, the printer's /etc/password file, which, is, again, another standard Linux component. And then by using the fs download command, they discovered that after they had surveilled the exposed file system, they were able to add a static invocation of the netcat command upon boot up. Okay, there's no reason that printer firmware should have the netcat command in its binary directory, except that someone just didn't care. They just took a standard Linux build and put it in this printer, which is insane, because with netcat you can, for example, there's no purpose for the to use netcat. Maybe it would use it with a script to go fetch firmware updates, but that's lazy and sloppy, because netcat is, as I mentioned before, a very powerful tool, which among other things allows you to create servers, sort of ad hoc servers, just from a command. So they changed they added to the startup script an invocation of netcat that would create a fully remotely accessible command shell on any available port of their choosing. So after doing that, they then rebooted the printer. It came up, ran the startup script, Netcat was launched, listening for incoming connections on the port of their choosing, which would then allow anyone that knew where the port was to remotely connect to and have full shell access to the printer. Now we know what was found 2 months ago, and we know that the world is full of remotely network exploitable HP printers containing seriously vulnerable and exploitable firmware, which HP has no ability to remotely update, assuming that the default across a large population of those printers is the same as it was in this case, which is it will not update its firmware by default, which means that this install base of printers makes perfect hosts for the insertion of advanced persistent threat malware within both consumer and enterprise networks. So, if our experience teaches us anything, we know that these highly vulnerable printers will continue to exist on networks forever until they finally die and are decommissioned. But to the degree that they are alive, they will never go away.
And they could be used to what? Spread malware? What kinds of stuff?
Well, they could be used as a persistent outpost for any sort of threat actor. For example, it could reach out from inside the network to establish a connection to a remote server in a foreign country.
Which we don't, thank God, an HP printer, somebody could compromise it and then have full access to our network, essentially.
Correct. And persistent access. That is, even if you shut down all the power and then brought it all back up again, this thing would come back up and reinstantiate itself and reconnect to the remote, the remote command and control server.
And it's all the jet directs, or
I would say so. The takeaway for our listeners is everyone within range of this podcast should proactively update any HP printer firmware within their control and responsibility as soon as possible. So, just fire up the printer manager that gets installed when you install an HP printer and just go and update its firmware.
Has HP pushed the update?
They can't. Because
no, but I mean, but if you asked for it, there is a fix.
Yes. For the last 2 months.
Okay.
And this is the problem: is the printers aren't updating themselves.
Right.
And so the printers in the closets, the printers, next to the water cooler. I mean, again, our listeners need to update their HP printers, but unfortunately, not everyone listens to this podcast, and there's just a massive install base of HP printers.
We know the NSA will be safe, and thank God for that.
Yes, we do.
Update your printers, gentlemen.
I'm sure they are. GitHub hosted a fun analysis. They took the top 32 million passwords and ran some analysis of them. I have it in the show notes and a link to the GitHub page that has 2 additional graphs. But this is fun. So this is the distribution of a password population by length. So, for example, I don't even know who has a 4-character password. Maybe that's a PIN. But 0.265% is 4 characters. 0.612% is 5. 2.47% is 6 characters. Even a little fewer. 2.06% is 7. Okay, then the big one,
we like even
more than
numbers.
any other,
We like even numbers.
Is 8.
Yeah.
Oh, you might be right.
Yeah.
Is 8, which is 23%. So 23% of the 32 million passwords which were analyzed from this repository had 8 characters. And then the chart just sort of falls off from there. 16.74% had 9 characters. 16.16 had 10. 11 characters were 12.89. 12 characters was 10.68. 13, 7.68. 14, 4.66. So with 14 character passwords, we're down to less than 5% of them. Impressively, there were some 15 character passwords. Now, these are LastPass users or 1Password or
I do
something
like 20 if I can. 24.
Exactly.
38.
Exactly.
70. You have 64 character passwords.
But still, 17 characters is as far as this goes, and so we're back to 0.26%. So, and as we know, unfortunately, there are many sites that will say, "Oh, sorry, you can't use more than 15." And so, it's not surprising that there are not that many that have such long passwords. But so basically, the sweet spot, such as it is 8 characters. And what this does tell you, you have to know that anyone brute forcing is, because remember, all you get is a go no go after you make a guess at a brute force password. So the brute forcing people know this distribution well, and that means they're going to focus on all possible 8 combinations of 8 characters as their first choice, and then go to 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and so forth, which does not suggest that you should use 4, 5, 6, and 7 characters, because it just takes no time to blast through the total possible brute forcing of such a small number of characters per password. So it's certainly the case that longer passwords are better. But it's interesting that almost a quarter of all passwords are 8 characters.
Did you see the next chart? Nearly 90% of the passwords used only lowercase letters and numbers.
Yep.
So you want to help put a little punctuation in there and
just throw a little something unexpected in there.
Yeah, hit the shift key.
makes a big difference.
Yes, hit the shift key. Adding a single special character to a password composed of lowercase letters makes it theoretically 15 times less common. So there.
Nice.
That's where LastPass really saves you.
Yeah, it does. So, okay, we all know that the WannaCry worm malware, and by the way, the creation of that has recently been attributed to a cyber warfare group operating out of North Korea. So, attribution is always difficult. Yep. Right. Attribution is always difficult, but that's where things are pointing. So WannaCry leveraged the no longer, and I would argue not for a long time, mainstream, has it been mainstream, version 1 of Microsoft's server message block, the SMB, also known as Samba protocol. And we also know how difficult it has always been to remove support for legacy protocols, because there's always something somewhere that is no longer supported, cannot be updated, is mission critical, and only understands the legacy protocol. Thus, these things tend to never die unless they're just forced finally to die. Microsoft has finally stated that finally in the future, even though they've been trying for 5 years, they're going to disable the support for SMB version 1. Ned Pyle, who's the principal program manager in the Microsoft Windows Server High Availability and Storage Group, told the guys at Bleeping Computer that plans to disable SMB v1 have been in the works at Microsoft for the past 5 years. He said that the security issues of SMB version 1 were the main factor in deciding to disable the protocol. Yeah, after WannaCry forced you to backpatch Windows XP. But the fact that SMB version 2 was released 9 years ago was a factor, meaning that we've already had the successor for nearly a decade. Pyle also said Microsoft would prefer everyone use SMB version 3, which is 5 years old, released in 2012 as the standard. As we have similarly seen, for example, with the earlier insecure SSL versions, if SMB version 1 is available and enabled, even if it's not in common use, if it's available and not disabled, attackers can force a downgrade. Okay? They can perform a so-called downgrade attack from the use of the newer and improved protocols to the known protocols. Remember that in one of the reasons we finally shut down all earlier use of SSL in favor of TLS is that for a long time, for the sake of backward compatibility, even though we had newer versions of our secure HTTP tunnel protocol, TLS, servers still supported SSL. But when offered a choice, clients were able to say, oh, no, we don't know the new stuff, in order to force a downgrade to the use of the older and typically less secure fallback protocol, and thus subject servers to victimization through their willingness to support the older protocol. So anyway, given that running SMB version 1 is no longer necessary for modern enterprise users, and having it around opens up a significant security vulnerability, this Ned Pyle says it's time for it to be put to rest. He claimed the ubiquity of SMB v1 had made taking action more difficult, but he finally confirmed that when Windows 10 Redstone 3 is released, both in the user and the server variants, SMB v1 will be disabled by default for the first time in Microsoft's history since it was created. And, we've had file and printer sharing since, Windows 3? I mean, it's like it's always been there. So, yeah, sayonara. and good riddance.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. And the biggest ransomware payday of all time. A South Korean web host named Nayana, N-A-Y-A-N-A, was hit by the Erebus crypto malware. Although Erebus was originally targeted only at computers running Microsoft Windows operating systems, it was later modified to work against Linux systems. Now, it's unclear how Nayana became infected with Erebus, but an examination of the largely unpatched software the web hosting service appeared to be running allowed Trend Micro to presume that the attackers exploited a well-known vulnerability. Trend Micro wrote, "As for how this Linux ransomware arrives, we can only infer that Erebus may have leveraged vulnerabilities or a local Linux exploit. For instance," they wrote, "based on open source intelligence, Nayana's website runs on Linux kernel 2.6.24.2, compiled back in 2008. Security flaws like Dirty Cow," they wrote, "that can provide attackers root access to vulnerable Linux systems are just some of the threats it may have been exposed to. Additionally, Nayana's website uses Apache version 1.3.36 and PHP version 5.1.4, both of which were released back in 2006. So both 11 years old. Apache vulnerabilities and PHP exploits are well known. In fact, there was even a tool sold in the Chinese underground expressly for exploiting Apache struts. The version of Apache Nayana used is run as a user of nobody, which is the UID 99, the nobody user, which indicates that a local exploit and subsequent privilegation may have been used in the attack. Okay, so now, as for the ransom paid to obtain the decryption key for essentially their entire enterprise, the fee was high due to the fact that all of the data stored on 153 Linux servers and 3,400 customer websites had been encrypted. Nayana's own blog posting stated that the initial ransom demand was for 5 billion won worth of Bitcoin, which is roughly 4.4 million US dollars. Company negotiators later managed to get the fee lowered to 1.8 billion won and ultimately landed a further reduction to 1.2 billion won, or just over $1 million, which ransom they did pay. In an updated post last Saturday, the Nayana engineers said they were in the process of recovering the data, cautioning that the recovery was difficult and would take some time. So a $1 million Bitcoin ransom payout, a big payday for the ransomware people. And, that's sort of news you don't want to see going widespread, because that really paints a big target on any other hosting providers whose security may not be up to par. Shudder. I did want to note that Google Drive is adding a feature which, as I mentioned at the top of the show, does not compete completely, at least, with the feature set offered. Actually, it's minimal feature, does not compete with the feature set offered by Carbonite. But the Google blog states that on June 28th, which is Wednesday, a week from tomorrow, they said, we will launch, quote, Backup and Sync from Google, which is a new tool intended to help everyday users back up files and photos from their computers so they're safe and accessible from anywhere, which is a little bit of an oxymoron, but we'll discuss that later. Backup and Sync is the latest version of Google Drive for Mac and PC, which is now integrated with the Google Photos desktop uploader. So essentially what this does is, I have a picture of the UI in the show notes, which shows a desktop clicked, showing that this particular desktop had 220 megabytes on it. The documents folder checked, and it had 712 megabytes in this instance. The pictures folder checked, and it had 2.2 gig, and the photo library under that had 1.9 gig. And so this backup and sync tool will replace the current Google Drive uploader client for Mac and PC, and will also be integrated into the desktop Google Photos uploader. So what's different about this is, if anyone has used Google Drive, rather than creating new Google Drive folders on a user's system, the tool allows users to select the standard system drives that their system already has, desktop, documents, pictures, photo library, and so forth, and then it will clone those chosen folders up to Google Drive and then keep them synced. So the system is targeted toward, I would argue, because this will not recover a crashed system. So it's targeted toward more, typical consumers who just want a backup solution for their, a limited set of the system's entire content. and typically just their own work product. Because as we know, Google gives you 15 gigs for free. And if you have your typical storage on lots of machines, you will overflow that quickly. And then you would need to augment the free storage provision in order to, and start paying Google for the privilege of having, all of this content synchronized. But, so it's a nice step forward. And in 8 days, that should go live.
I don't like iCloud, but it does have that advantage. I'm trying to think. There's not a lot of services like this that let you choose the folders. OneDrive, iCloud, and Google all use their own kind of special Dropbox, special folders. So
yeah, as long as, from a security standpoint, I'm nervous about synchronizing to a cloud provider where I'm not providing. I mean, we originally coined the phrase TNO, and PI, pre-internet encryption, where we're encrypting our contents, and that encrypted blob is then being sent. I mean, there are problems with doing that in a bandwidth-friendly fashion, which is why Google's able to do this. That is, the initial cloning would require a large transfer of data. I'm sure they're compressing and doing smart things, but then they're just able to do incremental maintenance of that blob by looking for changes. But again, I would say to users who are thinking about this, don't put the keys to the kingdom in there, because we don't know how safe this ultimately is. I mean, we're sure Google is, good with crypto and doing what they can, but again, you're trading convenience and not having to deal with this yourself for absolute security. I'm not using it for my stuff, but I could see that it'd be very useful for casual users who want to be able to synchronize the major folders where their own work product is, their documents and the desktop. I think it makes sense. And why don't we take our last break, Leo?
Well, okay. Have a nice cup of coffee, and I will talk about our sponsor for this portion of the show, ironically, Carbonite.com. Now, Carbonite is a backup solution, but it's a little more complex and a little more sophisticated than what Google's offering. In fact, it'll back up
much.
It'll back up everything. It will encrypt it. So that's nice. But they have a lot of solutions for businesses, for home, and it's very affordable. As Google stops at 15 gigs, then you have to buy additional storage, which can be quite expensive. Carbonite, you pay one low yearly fee, and it's for everything, any amount of data you'd like to back up. So you don't have to kind of meter what you're doing. You just go to Carbonite.com. Another nice feature of Carbonite, and this one I'd recommend for business. In some of their business plans, they offer versioning, which means if you got bit by cryptoware, like WannaCry, you would say, fine. You wouldn't pay $1 million. You would just wipe your drive and restore it from Carbonite in the previous unencrypted version. You notice if you go to the Office section, they also have hybrid backup solutions like their eVault, their E2 hybrid backup. Gives you a local hard drive and Carbonite hard drive, which is a really good solution for business. If you want to know about malware and especially ransomware mitigation, you might want to take a look at their resources tab on the Office side. They have a lot of information about ransomware. They've started a site called fightransomware.com that gives you a ton of really useful, practical tools that I bet you that Korean ISP wish they'd learned about. Carbonite.com. Here's the deal. You could try it for free for home, for office, for Mac or PC. If you go to Carbonite.com and use the offer code SECURITYNOW. Now, no credit card needed. It's a free trial, no cost to you. But if you use the offer code SECURITYNOW, you're going to get 2 free bonus months if you decide to buy. As we've known, if you're listening to this show, you know that the best defense against malware is a good backup. Because even if you get malware, a good backup protects you. Carbonite.com. Secure, easy, safe. Tell your friends about it too. because it's a great solution for unsophisticated users. You might look at something like Google's solution and say, oh, that's easy. Tell them about Carbonite. They're going to say, oh, yeah, that's a better way to go. Carbonite.com, the offer code security now. All right, Steve, we still got we've got a ways to go. I'm looking at your show notes. We got business to do still.
We do. This is from the But Of Course It Is department. PC Magazine reports that it's possible and fairly easy to hack a PC with a vape pen.
Now that's just weird.
So, well, and in retrospect, it's not surprising. Researchers at a recent London security show warned that and demonstrated that USB rechargeable e-cigarettes could be modified without much effort to infect a victim's PC with malware.
You mind if I charge my vape pen on your PC? I just I just need a few minutes. It'll charge really fast.
We take a hit off your PC, and then I can take a hit off my vape pen.
Wow.
So remember, as we've covered here in the past, a USB device automatically registered either as a USB keyboard or can be automatically registered as a USB keyboard, or more cleverly, as a network adapter, which, when enumerated by the USB system, will be queried for its DHCP configuration information. That allows it to declare itself to be the system's network gateway, and thereby reroute all subsequent network traffic through itself. So our podcast followers should already be highly resistant to allowing anyone to plug anything into their machine's USB ports. But enterprise environments may have less control over such interactions. So the takeaway here is that any USB thingy, no matter how apparently benign and innocent, could be exchanging more than USB power with any USB port. And as we know also, the solution, if you must charge, is a USB condom.
I carry it with me everywhere. Yes.
Yep. It's just so easy and simple. I like this one. The what's it called? It's called the PortaPower, or PortaPow, PortaPow. It's a little red plug. It comes in a 2-pack, and so if you have that around and someone wants to stick their vape pen into your machine, you say, hold on a second, let me just slip this little condom over your vape pen, and then they're welcome to suck power. And this thing protects the data, because only a USB is a 4-wire interface. It's got ground, it's got 5-volt power, and then it's got a send and receive lines. So 2 of the 4 just are terminated in the condom, so that only ground and power are able to go through.
And knowing you took this thing apart to verify that, right?
Yep.
Because people are going to say, well, who are these PortaPow people? Why should I trust them? Because Steve took it apart and knows that only 2 of the lines are connected. How did I know that you did that? I just knew you did that. That's great. Well done.
Okay, so a bit of miscellany, and then some closing the loop feedback with our listeners. Last week, I tweeted what I thought was a very on-point and humorous video about the problems of using chip cards. And I said, my tweet said, quote, "It's unfortunate that this humorous video about using chip cards is not that much of an exaggeration." I mean, there was some exaggeration there, but again, my own experience in the U.S. allowed me to relate to this. Now, I wanted to follow up and just mention that the majority of responses from my Twitter followers, who are mostly Security Now followers, was, what? Huh? Chip and pin works great here.
Yeah.
What's wrong with the U.S.?
Yeah. Because we don't use chip and pin.
Exactly, which was interesting to me since my experiences, as I said, have been largely similar to those in the video. So the conclusion would be that U.S. implementations, because they're new and kind of not yet ready for prime time, are much more finicky than in those countries where credit card chips have had a lot of time to mature. Because, I mean, I see, for example, many chip-enabled machines do not yet accept chips. So you'll see one that's got the slot and you stick it in, and then the person says, "Oh, no, you have to swipe." It's like, oh, okay, fine. And I mean, sometimes there's like duct tape over the slot, and or you'll try to swipe the card, but then they go, "Oh, no, you have to use the chip if you have one." It's like, okay, fine. And Lord help you if you insert the card before you're told to.
You gotta leave it in there. And,
or if you take it out before, like after. And it takes a long time in the U.S.
It's a lot longer, yeah.
It's like, what the heck is going on? And what's really sad is that what we also know is that this doesn't actually provide measurably more security.
Why not, Steve? Why not?
Are you watching?
I'm watching the video. Yeah. She's having all the problems you would expect, with one of these things.
For anyone who's interested who doesn't follow, I've got the link to the YouTube video in this week's show notes. It is pretty funny. But I wanted to acknowledge all of our international listeners who think there's something wrong in the U.S. You're right.
Yes.
There's clearly something wrong over here. We haven't figured out how to do it. And this week's Darwin Award winner. NBC, actually, I noted from I used to be in Northern California, so KRON is the local NBC affiliate
Not anymore.
station.
You haven't been here in a long time. They were.
Okay.
Now they're just independent.
So anyway, they carried the story of a group of not too clever thieves who stole a bunch of GPS tracking devices from a tech manufacturer, but they were not too difficult to track down.
Why is that, Steve?
Because they were GPS devices that they stole.
So they just followed the device, and
that's right.
Yeah.
I have two short fun notes about Spinrite.
Actually, it is from an NBC affiliate, not Cron, but WCMI TV Columbus.
Oh, interesting.
Now maybe they took,
it was picked
Cron.
up.
That's what it was. It was. I see Cron on it. But
right.
Yeah. That's funny. Okay.
So anyway, yes, the Darwin Award winners do not steal something that can track you after you have stolen it. That's not good.
$18,000 worth of GPS.
So I think that you don't want to steal trackers because trackers are trackers.
They put in a storage locker that contained a lot of other stolen stuff, including drugs. So we won't be seeing much of them for a while.
So James Mudd, who is in Oxford in the UK, said, "Hi, Steve and Leo. I really enjoy the podcast and look forward to it every week. I've been listening for years and just started listening again from the beginning." Well, you have 617 episodes to catch up on.
That's a lot of listening.
He says, "I often Spinrite drives before," which of course is a verb now, "before moving them between systems and formatting them. So I have a question. Is it better to Spinrite the drive, then format, or format first, then Spinrite?" He says, "I usually Spinrite first, somehow feeling that having data on the drive is better, but logic tells me it shouldn't make a difference." And James, I would agree with your logic. I thought about this for a while. It's like, I can't see either way. I would say go for convenience. If it's, for whatever reason, easier to Spinrite it before where it is before you move it, then do that. If it's easier to Spinrite it after you move it and establish it and format it, then do that. So I would opt for whichever just makes the most sense from a convenience standpoint. Logistically, or in terms of what Spinrite's doing, it doesn't matter at this point. And secondly, Matthew Norton in Northwest Indiana. No, I don't think the Spinrite can take credit for every miracle which is coincident with its use, although we do see it often doing things that are unexpected. In this case, the subject was another random thing that Spinrite fixed. And he wrote, I'd been having an issue with my numlock not turning on when I booted my computer, even though it was turned on in the BIOS and in Windows. I did a Spinrite check of my drives, and ever since then, the numlock has turned on at boot. Thanks for the great product. Eagerly awaiting Spinrite's future. Thanks for the podcast. I've been listening since episode 1. Now with numlock. So
nice.
I can't explain that. I mean,
you fixed his numlock.
Maybe something about the way the system was booting. There could have been a little glitch in the boot process that clicked the numlock off. Who knows? But Matt, I'm happy that Spinrite was to the.
I think you should put this in your on your website in your ad copy.
Not guaranteed.
No, but might.
Numlock, but you
fix
never
your
know.
numlock. Yeah.
You never know.
I think that'd be a good name for Spinrite 6.
If your lock is numb, then this will fix it.
Right.
So a couple feedback from our listeners. Dan Sidor asked, he said, Ubiquiti Edge Router X looks great. Do you also have experience with their Unify access points? And I wanted to remind Dan that, yes, the Ubiquiti Edge Router X looks great, but we recently covered the fact that unfortunately, all of the Ubiquiti wireless products did need to get their firmware updated because there was a recent exploit that affected them all. The good news was it did not affect the wired routers, which we like and have been actively suggesting our listeners use, but all of the various wireless ones did have that problem. So their hardware is nice. I know that you've been at some point, Leo, you were a Ubiquiti Wi-Fi user, I think, right?
No, I never used their Wi-Fi.
Okay.
But they were like the first to do mesh. It was a commercial version, and it required. We might have tried it here. It required at the time no longer a PC running Java to control it.
Oh Lord!
Yeah, they fixed that, but and Ubiquiti now makes a wireless Wi-Fi system called the Amplify that I have used just briefly for review purposes. I like
their naming: Unify, Amplify, Semperfy. It's like,
Burke says we did try it at the Brick House, but I think we ended up using Ruckus equipment, I believe, is what we use here.
Anyway, so Dan, I would just say proceed with caution. I make sure that the firmware for it has been updated in the last couple of months and that you're running that updated firmware, because we were watching them at the time and they were a little slow in reacting. And so it was like, ooh, I hope, I was hoping it wasn't going to be affecting the wired products also. So there's a bit of a caution there. And then Kevin tweeted, what was that switch/router you and Leo recommended a few months back? And there it is, the Ubiquiti Edge Router X. And I think I've got it linked to in the GRC link farm. If you just put link farm into Google now, for me at least, the first link that comes up is GRC. And I think I've got a link there to it.
And it, it's not wireless. It's a $50, just 6-port, simple little switch and router with a lot of sophisticated software.
Yes,
it's very cool.
What I like about it is that whereas our typical router has a router core connected to a switch, which creates the ports. Like if it's a 4-port router or a 5-port router where there's one main port like a WAN port and then 4 LAN ports. Normally, the typical router is a switch that runs the 4 LAN ports. This router has individual interfaces, individual network interface controller (NIC) interfaces per port. And that allows you to give each port its own IP range to block the interacting traffic among ports. And there's a lot of power in the UI, even more power at the command line, that really allows you to do things like create an IoT segmented network and really get lost in feature land. So very neat little router. And again, $49, and it's cute. Even, Elaine got one because she's been listening to this podcast and wanted to improve their security. So the last couple of weeks, talking about Squirrel, and it was in the context of various discussions about two-factor authentication and so forth. And I got some feedback over in GRC's Security Now news group saying, okay, Steve, enough about Squirrel. So I wanted to recognize that feedback and to assure people that this is not going to become the Squirrel podcast. But at the same, as a consequence of my talking about it, it did raise a couple of questions that I want to answer briefly from our listeners. One question asked, are there any safeguards in Squirrel against DNS spoofing? And the answer is yes. When I was talking in the last couple of weeks about the increased emphasis we have just put in the last month, it's what I've been doing essentially, is bringing the so-called CPS, the client provided session, bringing it to the forefront and making it a mandatory feature. It absolutely protects against DNS spoofing attacks when you are using Squirrel on the same system you're logging in. That is, remember, you could either use it in the same device or cross-device login. So yes to DNS spoofing. And then another question, if the malware is taking control of your DNS, would your mitigation on man-in-the-middle attacks still work against Squirrel? And again, yes. So we are safe against any kind of DNS attack as a consequence of the way this works. Another listener asked, listened last SN podcast about dynamic pass and two-factor authentication spoofing. He said, one more reason to use a password manager, it will not recognize wrong address. And to that I respond, true, but password managers will be completely fooled by DNS spoofing attacks. So, as I noted in the previous two questions, Squirrel cannot be, but password managers will be. So if you go to the legitimate looking website with a URL domain that exactly matches what the password manager shows, your password manager will populate those fields. But if your DNS has been intercepted and spoofed, you could be taken to a different physical server than where you believe you're going, and your password manager will populate the fields, and script running on the page, as we have already seen, is able to immediately capture that information. So could steal your identity for that site. And finally, Chris Taylor asked, could a hacker kill Squirrel localhost port and run their own hijacker? And the answer is yes, absolutely. One of the things that it is important to understand is the attack environment, and there is absolutely no practical protection for a system that has malware on it. And to believe otherwise is just fooling us. Windows is not a secure operating system. None of our PC operating systems are sufficiently secure to allow us to create software that malware running on that machine cannot subvert. So I did not intend to suggest that anything that we're doing here is proof against a local compromise of the system. There just is no known for any of this technology. But the big attacks are the network-based attacks. Something remote. A website losing control of their database of user accounts, or DNS spoofing, or man in the middle, or anything remote network. And for all of those, we have that nailed, but not for local, and nobody does. I would argue it's not possible to protect against a local, essentially an internal attack. Someone whose handle is Le French Fab said, "Hi, just listened to SN616, so that was last week. Do you think Apple's two-factor authentication is in any way better than the way used by Google/Microsoft? Thanks." And I thought about that, and I think it is. Whereas the other companies are forced to use text messaging through the mobile cellular text system, Apple has the significant advantage of having their own proprietary closed and encrypted messaging system in the form of iMessage, which allows Apple to get those second factor tokens to their intended recipients without fear of man in the middle or other on the fly interception. So it is a significant advantage. I still would argue that the use of TOTP, the time-based, auth style authentication, is by far more secure. But if you need a per authentication transmission, then Apple's ability to send that to you through their own encrypted proprietary messaging platform makes that much more secure than having it go and be received as a text message over the cellular system.
Although, what happens if it's your first Apple device or you don't have any other Apple devices? Because it uses another Apple device to authenticate. What if I buy an iPhone? I don't have a Mac or an iPad.
So it doesn't send it to the same device? The one
that would be dopey. Oh, let's authenticate you on this device. Here's the code. Why bother? No, it doesn't send it to you on the same device. It sends it to you on another Apple device. I presume that they then offer it via text or some other bad channel.
In order to get you bootstrapped the first time.
It relies on you having a bunch of Mac or Apple products.
Yeah, and in fact,
it's very typical.
And that's what happens for me is, when I'm in fact, it just happened when I was setting up the new iPad Pro, is that it said, and I got little pop-ups everywhere,
right,
saying that that I was using my identity on a new device. It's like, okay, fine. Yeah.
But they do make you turn it on now, which you got to commend them for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You do have to use two-factor now.
Bill sent a tweet saying, yesterday, I thought this was a great question. Yesterday, a friend was asked by TD Bank if they could keep the recording of her voice print for security purposes. And
Schwab does that too. They have voice identification login.
And he asks, how unique is it? And my response is, okay, it's not unique enough to be the sole identifier, but it is good as an additional factor.
Right.
So like a PIN, a PIN can't identify you uniquely, but it can be it's a valuable additional it's a disqualifier if it doesn't match. And so if someone is pretending to be this friend of his, and it's a gruff male voice that not even in the ballpark of sounding the same, it's like, we're not really convinced that's you. So
yeah,
I think
me. I have a cold.
Absolutely valuable as a disqualifier, but not as a qualifier.
So my mom, and I don't know how Schwab does it, but they said, "Can we do voice authentication?" And I just said, "Don't do it, Mom." And I don't know what they're doing. But if you're right, if it was a second factor, that'd probably even be better than texting you a number, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Again, as a disqualifier, but not a qualifier.
Right.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Let me in. Hey.
And again, not perfect, because you could imagine, surreptitiously recording the person's a sample of the person's voice saying something that you want. And in fact, we were talking a couple weeks ago that we're now seeing AI-ish software that can listen to someone talk and then then synthesize them saying anything that you want them to say. So it's getting very spooky out there.
What about people like me whose voice is all over the darn place?
Yes, you're a hose,
Cleo. Okay.
We can't ever believe anything we hear someone claiming that you said any longer, because the software is out there to synthesize it. And me too, for that matter. We're 616 podcasts. I've probably used every word in my vocabulary.
Exactly. There's no word they can't duplicate.
So listener Ian Beckett, who's often tweeting, said, "Tell me why every password interface doesn't have a 3 times and you're locked out for X hours as standard."
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, we know the answer to that.
Because people get locked out.
Yes. People are like,
no, it's monkey 1, 2, 3, 4. Monkey.
Wait, did I use my sister's name backwards that time? And, and unfortunately, it would just be a nightmare for customer support. I will mention that GRC's email server has a 0 tolerance guessing policy.
Oh, I like
that. After I watched spamming servers connect up and just run through a ridiculous list of names, I implemented some technology where one single mistake and that attempted connection is blacklisted for quite a while, because we've never had any problem with receiving email. As long as you send it to an account that exists, it comes right through. But if you're a spammer and you're just hooking up and guessing, sorry, that's just not going to work for you. Brilliant. So there are places where that kind of one strike and you're out policy can work, but unfortunately, not in the password space.
I recently, a company that I still work for has, I don't want to give away any secrets, but a company that I still work for requires every 3 months training in FCC rules. And I have to log in, but they change the password every 2 months. So that means I never actually, because I don't ever use it otherwise, I don't actually know my password ever. And now I guess they're so strapped for tech support people that when you go online, call the tech support to reset your password, they say, if you're calling to reset your password, which obviously is a common practice, use our online service. Except that the online service doesn't seem to know who I am. So it says, no, there's no user by your name. So I don't know what to do. It's, geez Louise. Anyway, this is a problem. And we've already said changing your password by a calendar is not more secure. It's less secure, right?
And the good news is that the NIST guidelines were finally revised to state that. So with any luck, that'll percolate out into the IT space. And, it used to be that no one could get fired for choosing IBM, even after they stopped
offering. It's more secure, boss.
Yes.
Right.
And so now no one can get fired for following the official NIST guidelines, which now state there is no security benefit, and it reduces security for compulsory password change for no reason other than, oh, it's been a while. So
well, if they had any IT people, I could tell them, but apparently there's no one there. So I'm kind of, I'm kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. I can't actually get into my account, and there's no one there to help me. So
wow.
Yeah. This is you nailed it. This support costs that everybody's really concerned about, right?
Right.
That's the ultimate issue.
Yep. So David Benedict took a little exception, I think, to my being harsh with Google and Android about Google's official policy that the draw over problem would not be fixed. And he raised a good point. He said Google not fixing does not mean they won't scrutinize apps more than before. And I would imagine, in fact, they will increase the depth of their app scrutiny in order to prevent abuse of draw over. So, David, that's a very good point. Thank you for bringing it up. And lastly, this week's Laugh Out Loud tweet, courtesy of a retweet from our listener Morgan Speck. He retweeted Leslie, whose Twitter handle is Hacks for Pancakes. she tweeted, or he tweeted, I don't know if that's I don't know, Leslie, said,
it's a man's spelling,
personally,
Lesley, so we'll say it's a guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
He tweeted, personally, I think this Windows 7 thing is overhyped. And I shall be switching back to XP since it has regular security patch cycle once again.
It sounds like you, Steve.
Last couple of months, Microsoft has been updating XP every month, so let's all go back.
Really, more than just for WannaCry? There have been some other patches?
Yeah, the last couple of months. And then there was an emergency out-of-cycle patch also. So, yep, we're getting our XPs all updated. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I think we should send Hacks for Pancakes some pancakes for that tweet.
And as they say, Leo, that's a show.
It's a wrap, ladies and gentlemen. Steve Gibson, he's at grc.com. That's where you can find information about Squirrel. You did you were on Daily Tech News Show with Tom, I saw. So you can listen to your explanation.
Piece on Thursday.
Yeah. Yep. But there's a lot more stuff at grc.com, including Steve's bread and butter, which is Spinrite, the world's best hard drive maintenance and recovery utility. If you have a hard drive, even if it's not a spinning one, an SSD, you got to have Spinrite. Go to grc.com to get it. Use Shields Up. That's free. In fact, everything else is free. He's got lots of great stuff over there, including this show, audio versions and human transcriptions by Elaine Ferris.
Yes, Heat Willing. We're hoping that Elaine is still online. That's 111 where she is. So she did mention that she might have a problem. So, cut us both a little slack if she's a little bit later than usual. We'll hope that things are going to work out okay.
I had an interesting experience on Sunday. It was so hot, over 100 degrees in Petaluma, that my solar panels stopped working. You'd think this would be like a golden time for them, but no, it was too hot. So they took a little break, but they're back now. You can also find the show on our site, twit.tv/SN for Security Now. But the best thing to do, and you'll be glad when you, like many of our listeners, start over at episode 1, that you have them all. Subscribe to the podcast. It'll automatically download, and you can listen at your leisure. Do what the NSA does. Listen every single
I was
week.
Just going to say, I wanted to sign off saying I am flattered and gratified that the NSA has asked for formal permission to copy the podcast into their intranet.
That's
very
awesome.
cool.
That really
Thanks,
is.
guys.
It's very high praise. And, we talk a lot about the NSA, and we, maybe mock them a little bit. But I have to say, they have the best cybersecurity recommendations on their website. They have really good stuff. They understand that their mission is also to protect American businesses and individuals against cyber crime. And they do a very good job of it. So there's some obviously very smart people at the NSA. And I'm at this point now gone too far at kissing up to
And they clearly have good taste.
They have excellent taste. And I just want to thank them for letting me back into the country. So, you know, it was amazing. It was like I didn't do any of the things I thought about, wiping the thing, bringing burner phones and stuff. And it's good I didn't, because I just scooted right back into the country. Yeah, no reason to. Mr. Steve Gibson, bless you. We'll see you next week. We do the show every Tuesday, 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 Eastern, 20:30 UTC. If you want to join us live or even in studio, we can put you in here if you email tickets@twit.tv. We have a recent graduate from computer science at Carleton up in Ottawa, and he's visiting with his mom as a celebration of his graduation. And he's going into
Very cool.
He's going into tech, so that's a good thing. He's going to be a full stack programmer. Tickets@twit.tv. Would love to see you in the studio. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Security Now. Bye-bye, Steve.
See you, my friend. Bye.
Security Now.